What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at the latest High Republic novel, Into the Dark. Now, before we get into it, the first half of this video will be completely spoiler free other than just the stuff that's pretty much already mentioned in the blurb and in the marketing for the book. But then in the second half of the video, I will be getting into some spoiler territory, so if you do plan on reading Into the Dark, then be sure to keep an eye out for the spoiler warning about halfway through. So anyway, getting into it, Into the Dark is the third novel from this new High Republic era, with Light of the Jedi and A Test of Courage being the other two entries. All three of these novels take place within essentially the exact same time frame, all of which are linked to the Great Disaster, or at least have some level of attachment to the event. Now, as far as I'm aware, Into the Dark is actually chronologically the first entry into the High Republic era, seeing as it does start a few days prior to the start of Light of the Jedi. However, that is neither here nor there. They both pretty much cover the exact same time frame. One thing that I think Claudia Gray did so well in this novel was allowing it to stand on its own 2 feet as a unique individual Star Wars story, while also clearly connecting to the other novels so that it also doesn't feel detached from the series. The story alone was exciting, engaging, and actually fairly mysterious throughout the course of the novel, and despite actually being a much smaller scale story than Light of the Jedi, it actually has huge implications for the entire galaxy through some of the events that unfold within the story. Now, there were a bunch of new characters that we were introduced to in the book, and while some of them were definitely a little bit hit and miss for me personally, there were also a few characters that I've really enjoyed and actually felt pretty connected to. Wraith Silas, the protagonist of the novel, is a young Jedi Padawan who's starting to come of age and is getting closer and closer to his knighthood within the Jedi Order. We learn a lot about Wraith very early on in the book, mostly that he's essentially the Jedi equivalent of a bookworm, much preferring to study the contents of the Jedi archives rather than being out and about adventuring and doing more practical missions. I actually connected to Wraith quite a bit, honestly, as I am also more of a stay-at-home type myself, preferring to work and get stuff done from the comfort of my own home rather than being the adventurous, spontaneous type, and so I could definitely tell very early on that Wraith was going to be a character that I really liked, and that stayed very true throughout the book. Now, in saying that, Wraith is also an 8th grade student, and that is something I definitely cannot relate to, but like I said, I really enjoyed Wraith as a character, and I think he was really well written by Claudia Gray. He has a lot of internal conflict and questions himself and the Jedi Order multiple times throughout the story, and yet he also shows quite a lot of growth in the very short amount of time that this book takes place in, and I'm definitely very interested to see how his story develops throughout the rest of the High Republic. Without touching on any spoilers, his last few words in this book leave some very open-ended questions, and it's easy to see that we will be seeing much more of Wraith throughout this era. Now, another thing that I will say about Into the Dark is that it honestly never had any real boring parts for me personally, other than a few flashback moments throughout that honestly didn't feel all that relevant or important to the story for the most part, but aside from those flashbacks, there were never any chapters that I started to read and kind of just wanted to move on to the next one. There are multiple different story arcs within the book, but all of them pretty much take place within the exact same situation that continues to unfold as the story progresses, and so other than just liking certain characters more than other characters, there were never really any moments that I got bored of or just wanted the story to progress to get away from that section. As I mentioned earlier, there were a few characters that I didn't really care all that much for, and even a character by the name of Geode, who, without even slightly joking here, is a literal sentient rock, but I wouldn't go as far as saying I disliked any characters at all. Some were just far more interesting than others, which honestly is always going to be the case in pretty much any story. Now, as much as I was and still am very unsure about Geode, I will say that he was the focus of quite a lot of comical relief throughout the novel, almost playing that sort of typical droid role within Star Wars, and despite never speaking, I actually did end up caring for his character due to some things towards the end that I won't spoil, and I think that says quite a lot about Claudia Gray's writing. She made me literally care about a rock. Let that sink in for a minute. Overall, I think the book was really well written, as is the case with pretty much everything that Claudia writes, and despite a few characters being hit and miss, there's really not all that much that stands out to me in terms of any flaws. I enjoyed Into the Dark more than I enjoyed A Test of Courage, however, I'm not too sure I'd rank it above Light of the Jedi. I think for me, personally, it comes in just below that one, but honestly, all 3 of these novels so far have been really enjoyable for me personally, and I would say that so far they're 3 from 3 in terms of these High Republic novels. Now, we are going to be moving into some spoilers here very quickly, so like I said, if you do plan on reading the book yourself, then I would definitely recommend clicking away right now, but if you're not planning on reading it and you do just want to hear a rough outline of some spoiler moments, then feel free to stick around. So the first thing that I need to talk about is our newest villain to the High Republic era, who are known as the Drengir. Now, I'm sure you guys may have already seen these guys somewhere on the internet before. I already knew about them before I actually read the book, as they have been advertised here and there across Twitter or YouTube, and these guys were definitely very interesting. I am planning on making a whole video on the Drengir, as I'd love to keep up with any new villains that we get, similar to the video that I did for Martian, Ro and the Nile, but I will still explain who these guys are just briefly. The Drengir are essentially a sentient species of plant, for lack of a better explanation, who are shrouded in the dark side of the Force. The Drengir are essentially a sentient species of plant, for lack of a better explanation, who are shrouded in the dark side of the Force. Now, that doesn't make them Force sensitive, at least not that we know of yet, but they are definitely some pretty evil characters, and from what we have already learned, they do seem like they're going to be very hard for the Jedi or even the Nile to have to deal with. Now, how we come to discover these creatures is that the Jedi accidentally remove some mysterious idols that they find on the space station when they get stranded after the Great Disaster, and once they are able to head back to Coruscant, they take these idols back to Coruscant to essentially remove the dark side from this space station, making it safer for anyone who visits, or so they think. The Jedi thought that the idols were what held the dark side powers, as all of the Jedi were getting weird visions during their time on the space station. However, they very quickly realized that it wasn't the idols that were holding the dark side within, it was in fact the idols holding and containing the dark side within the space station. After removing the idols, the long dormant, essentially hibernating creatures known as the Drengir are let free, and from here chaos ensues within the space station. What I found really interesting was that the idols weren't actually placed there by the Jedi, but in fact by the Sith, thousands of years prior, meaning that the Sith army from the Old Republic times did have a run-in with these Drengir creatures, and clearly found them to be a powerful, dangerous foe, opting to trap them and contain them there, rather than dealing with them via combat. Now anyway, these Drengir are eventually set free within the space station, and they turn out to be much more terrifying than anyone originally thought, seeming to be near on unstoppable even against a lightsaber, as they can essentially heal themselves in the same way that if you break the branch off a tree, it will eventually grow back. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the Drengir are dealt with by the Jedi, or even the Nile, who are clearly no ally of these creatures either. The book essentially ended in a battle of three groups: the Jedi, the Nile, and the new Drengir characters, who definitely seem terrifying, and I'm very cautious to see where their story goes in future content. Now, what I will say is that I was actually very skeptical at first, and to a degree I am still a little bit skeptical. Sentient plants being equally as dangerous as Jedi and Sith does seem to be a little bit out there at first glance, but then when you think about it, there are plenty of weird things like that in Star Wars already. In the Skywalker saga, there is quite literally a giant slug that is in control of essentially the entire Outer Rim, and none of us really blink an eye to that. So I understand a lot of people will be pretty skeptical and will probably just trash on the High Republic because it does sound very odd. And hey, like I said, I was and am still pretty unsure of it myself, but if they're done properly, which so far I think they have been, then I have no doubt that they can be pulled off as a pretty awesome new villain within Star Wars. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think of the book if you have read it, or if you haven't, then I'm definitely keen to hear your initial thoughts as well, although keep in mind that a lot of things can sound pretty dumb if you haven't actually read them yourself, so it's pretty hard to judge anything that you haven't actually read yet. That is going to do it for this one though, guys. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.